Hi, I'm Edwin
And I am Jack, and welcome back.
to the 950 Club
Yay!
1 year anniversary special,
Again!
part 2.
Part 2! Welcome back, guys, to our part 2 of our Ghibli special / 1 year anniversary special. It's been an joyous ride, and it's going to the second part of our special with The Wind Rises. Now, for a little background, Edwin and I, we always go back and forth what we're choosing. And of course, it took a long time process. And Edwin was the first to mention, oh, in a year from now, let's do Ghibli. Like he gave that initial spark plug, at least that fire in the beginning for our Ghibli discussion. And it takes a lot out of me. I admit that because I love these films. And there's even my all-time favorites. We haven't even touched the surface yet because they're really endeared to my heart. I'm like, am I worthy to even talk about them? But nonetheless, we went back and forth. It was an obvious call to do Nausicaa because that's Edwin's MMO. His number one. It's a perfect way to start to have the special, our first ever Ghibli film to talk about. For this one, though, for Wind Rises, it became like a weird discovery. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Because initially I wanted to review Whisper of the Heart. A film,
You did. You talked about that quite a bit.
Whisper of the Heart is a very fascinating Ghibli film.
Well, my thing is, I didn't understand why you didn't want to talk about Princess Mononoke, which I know as long as I've known you, you're like, that's my favorite. That's my favorite. That's my favorite.
It was one of our early discussions, too.
Yeah.
And part of me was because Mononoke's so sacred. And also how it ties into Nausicaa. It's very similar. Very similar. Almost similar story beats. I prefer Mononoke because it was really, really special. And for Nausicaa, though, it needed a breath of its own take. It's definitely similar in plot, things like that. So, for now, we'll keep Mononoke.
Well, at some point, and I'm going to hold you to this, we are going to discuss Mononoke.
Oh, man. Well, I'll get the kudos by that point. But Whisper of the Heart is a very interesting film because it's written by Miyazaki. He didn't direct it. And it's one of those like very overlooked films. And like I mentioned, how essence of our podcast is dive into those overlooked films. And it even has a recent live action adaptation. It's definitely a more endearing romance. One of the most unique ones too. But ultimately, because of doing research for Nausicaa, I had to finally check out the documentaries. I put them in a bay. I'm like, I don't want to see the magic happen. I don't want to see the magic happen. I saw the magic happen.
Yeah.
It's more common than you think, but it's also Ghibli. You expect Alice in Wonderland.
When I watched the Kingdom of
Dreams and Madness.
It was there was a mundane sense. There was a mundane, almost everyday sense to it.
A slice of life.
But at the same time, I fully understood that was not the way that normal studios work.
No.
There's no way.
I'm pretty sure Pixar's a million times different.
Yeah, there's no way that, because Miyazaki is the driving force behind these films, and he is allowed to work the way that he wants to. Yes, there's the illustrators, there's the background artists, there's the people who take the pictures to create the animation. There's all of that. But at the heart of this is Miyazaki working there. And so it's his imagination that drives this, and it's a completely and totally different process. So, yeah, I completely felt like, this is the magic. This is the magic happening in a way that I don't think any other studio in their right mind would, they wouldn't have the, I don't want to say that it's insane, but they wouldn't. I'm like, you can see executives like freaking out and saying, we can't work like this. We can't work like their ego would not allow them to say, "Hey, I'm going to, leave everything up to the whims and imagination of this one man." But Studio Ghibli, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's also like we mentioned how Miyazaki's so complex. He's set in his ways, his
Yeah.
practicality, his stubbornness over CGI, to overcome CGI effect too. Ghibli over the last couple of years have snuck that in. Even Kiki, I believe, has some CGI thrown in there. But ultimately, it's one of those things where, like, a starting point with Studio Ghibli is Miyazaki's madness. Also, it's fascinating to dive in towards how it's set up with the studio system for Ghibli, because they have two studios. And how I mentioned in our last special, how Miyazaki and Takada had to be separated. They work in different studios to do their special projects.
Yeah.
And during this documentary, in the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, or Madness and Dreams, it's two great geniuses doing their final films,
Yeah.
or supposed final films, at least for Miyazaki's case.
With Takahara, it was because he passed away.
Yeah, and he had complications. I'm not sure if he was open about it. It was like a sudden kind of thing, but it was more spiritually, practicality wise. Even the NHK government kind of interfering with their creative process. Miyazaki makes a comment, "This is the end. This is it." And the documentary is very honest, and I love the documentary.
Well, it's very interesting because Suzuki and Miyazaki are talking about the rise of conservative fascism.
Yeah.
And this was this documentary was filmed in 2017, and it's like
no, just before 2013.
Just before 2013,
2010 range, I think.
But it was released much later on.
Yes.
And so they're seeing the rise of it then.
Yeah.
They're realizing that there's going to be restrictions on their creative freedoms.
Yeah.
Which is it's pretty terrifying.
Well, what's super fascinating, super fascinating to me of these projects is that both directors, which the projects are Tale of Princess Kaguya and The Wind Rises, both directors, Miyazaki and Takahata, ultimately didn't want to do them.
Yeah.
They were like, I guess we'll do it. It's kind of like a sweet surrender, or bittersweet kind of surrender.
Yeah. They needed to be convinced, but did they really need to be convinced?
Exactly. It's a complex, and both are egotistical, have their ways, and
well, Miyazaki talks a lot about how difficult filmmaking is for him.
Yeah.
But I don't think he'd want to do anything else.
No, and he continues on. That's why his Wind Rise is technically his swan song.
Yeah.
In case something happens.
Yeah.
He's doing another project. I forgot the title of it.
Like Everyday Man?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course with the Isao Takahata, with Tale of Princess Kaguya, it's actually my favorite. It's Over Graveyard of the Fireflies.
Really?
Yes, I love it. I adore that one. It's in my top 40
okay.
compared to Princess Mononoke. And basically, it's one of those things where these are two different trajectories. And I wanted that to be the focus, at least the outer picture. That's why I picked Whisper of the Heart, because it's the outer picture. One of the few directors that did a Miyazaki production.
Yeah.
Overtaking the realms, as it were. And ultimately, during this process, though, I'm like, okay, Wind Rises. Surprisingly, I still haven't seen it.
Really?
Yeah.
You had never seen this before?
That's the thing.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of those things where it was always on the back burner. Confession time. I always got this film confused with Up on Poppy Hill.
Oh, I can.
Similar design, similar cover, and in Ghibli Fest, I'm a sucker for those. Wind Rises is usually kind of not there for Ghibli Fest, usually, and it's just one of the very few I didn't see in Studio Ghibli. I'm like, I guess I have to see it.
I saw this. I went to actually go see this with my sister when it was released. We really liked it.
Yeah.
We really liked it. But it was even she commented on it, that it was very different from the other Studio Ghibli films.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is a more adult film.
Yeah.
This is more of a personal
film too.
Yeah.
And of course, with Up on Poppy Hill, it's directed by his son, Goro Miyazaki, too. And I still have to see that one, too. Goro is pretty much another case study. Yeah, I know. Oh, man. I won't even dive into that. But anyway, so ultimately during this process, seeing that more and more, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting because initially with the Ghibli special, we want to get into the man's head, how crazy he can go and how stubborn he can go to his uttermost beauty. And Wind Rises is on the back burner. I'm like, I didn't really see it click. And little by little, showing how he wanted to design the planes. Little by little, his process with the other animators too. I wanted to have the story with Ghibli ultimately, and I thought Whisper Heart would be a-okay kind of squeezed in there. But more and more, I'm seeing these pieces come together, and I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. This looks interesting. It gets to a point where Miyazaki has a casting call in middle of production. They're not even done with the film or the animation process. He immediately thinks of one person, and that person is Hideki Anno, the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Oh my God, I was enamored. I'm like, did he mention his name?
Yeah.
I'm like, wait a second. And like Miyazaki's like, convinced, he has a very unique voice. I don't think I've heard anyone talk like him. I need somebody real. And like it was like a wonderful sequence in the documentary because Anno's like, okay, why am I here? Like,
Well, they were using. He didn't want to use voice actors.
yeah,
He wanted to use actors.
yeah,
And none of the actors, he wasn't satisfied with any of the actors' performances.
yeah. They're
Uh,
too actory, too of a
yeah.
machine. Yeah.
He's like, well, they're emoting too much, and it's not. They're not getting
He doesn't
across.
ring his bells.
And he says, well, maybe we should have Ano do it. And he's like,
It's like it'll start off as a joke.
it did.
Yeah.
It really did. And he's like, well, that would be interesting to see. And then when they have him come and test, Miyazaki says, you know what? That's him.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
And mind you, he's a dork. He's an animator. He's not a professional trained actor. I think he's done here and there roles, but this is like his showcase. And, and even they have a wonderful exchange during the documentary of him saying arigato. Like, no, that's not how you say it. Arigato. He's correcting him.
At that point, Ano was like, no, I don't. She's like, the lady who's running the entire thing is like, well, come on up. She's like, I don't want to. I don't want to talk to Miyazaki right now.
Yeah. And ultimately, it was like right then and there, I'm like, I gotta watch this film. And it made total sense. Nausicaa starting off as the beginning, and then for closure, Wind Rises.
Wind Rises, yeah.
We had to do it for our first Ghibli special. So without further ado, The Wind Rises. Yeah. Well, okay. Now, how to shape you watching this film? Now, how I mentioned how this is a film. We're talking about every influential director that hasn't done animation and other films as well. The other films I can't help but thinking of are The Hudsuckers Proxy from the Coen brothers. The other one is Tucker, Man in His Dream, relatively obscure Francis Ford Coppola film starring Jeff Bridges as the creator of the Tucker sedan. You ever seen it?
I have not seen it.
Yeah, same energy. It's ultimately an engineering film. It's ultimately an inventor film.
It's a film about. It's kind of the film about the creative process.
Extremely, yeah.
And where that spark comes from. From Juro, it comes from his dreams.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a Miyazaki film through and through.
Yeah.
Because it combines not only his passion for aviation, his passion for like planes and plane parts. It also it's about creativity, but it's also part of like the history of his life.
Yeah,
too.
it's kind of like a hybrid biography, and that's the thing.
It really is.
And the other influences I can't help but like think of, like immediately it reminded me of a lot of like good examples are Ed Wood and Charlie Chaplin movie, but ultimately it reminds me a ton of Millennium Actress. Satoshi Kon's one of his best films. And both, I've been meaning to do research on the relationship between the two, but they pretty much were different trajectories. Millennium Actress came before Wind Rises. I can't help but think like Miyazaki was influenced by that.
Well, this is a period piece.
Yeah.
This is a historical drama.
Yeah.
And it's a period piece that takes place, before the Second World War.
Yes.
And so you're not gonna have you're going to have a definite look and feel to Tokyo and Japan at this
Well,
time.
not only the visionary stuff with that, but also the how the film is handled, because they're hybrid biographies. Uh, Millennium Actress is influenced by the actresses of Sasuko Hara and Hideko Takamine,
Hmm.
both similar trajectories. And with Wind Rises is combined with Jiro Horikoshi, the inventor of the military planes for Japan during the war, and Tatsuro Hori, the famous Japanese author, who wrote The Wind Rises, the title itself, about his life with tuberculosis and his love story with his wife, and Nahoko, which is the lead female protagonist. Combined, and also the elephant in the room, Miyazaki's life.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a fascinating aspect of it, because hybrid biographies or fictionalized biographies are definitely a scarcity, definitely a rarity. So Ghibli doing this, it just opened my eyes, because I'm like, wait a second, that's kind of a cool field.
Yeah. It's very different
Yeah,
compared to a lot of other films.
yeah,
You don't, it's very risky too, because,
extremely. At least the liberties aspect of it. Yeah,
yeah. Well, not only that, but it's like, here's a studio that's mostly known for kids' movies, producing something that, while it has that look and feel of a Ghibli movie, this is definitely more an adult
yeah.
film.
And ironically, like, I remember you were talking about this because you finally saw Porco Rosso.
Mm-hmm.
And this, if I had to pick one Ghibli film that's similar in tone,
It would be Porco Rosso.
Porco Rosso.
Yeah.
Both are pretty much for adults.
Yeah. And Miyazaki even says that movie, and I don't know why he doesn't say this. He said Porco Rosso was foolish.
It's kind of a black sheep film.
Well,
Not gonna lie.
my thing is, it's like, I get. Well, my feeling is like, how are you making The Wind Rises, and yet you're calling, which is obviously an adult. The Wind Rises is an adult film.
Yeah,
It's
film.
It's a film. It's, well, I mean, they're all films.
Yeah.
But this is more of an adult film.
Yeah,
Yes, it starts out as a child daydreaming, but as you move along, the ideas of war and construction and the costs, those ideas. It's an anti-war film. I don't know how he can call Porco Rosso foolish in the same breath while he's making The Wind Rises.
Dad, and even
It's like,
yeah.
okay, I get that. And I mean, for me, Porco Rosso, I fell in love with that movie. I'm like, oh my God, it's
great.
It's beautiful.
It's great.
It's amazing.
It's a great film.
But that he says it's not for children, that's like, yes and no, because it gave me a real Popeye vibe. It really did.
No.
Yeah.
For me, Pinocchio, kind of like his Miyazaki's love with European culture.
Yeah.
You name it.
Well, it's like a sophisticated. I don't know if people are gonna get upset by this.
No,
but
I'm
to me,
not.
it's a more sophisticated version of Popeye.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the feeling that I walked away from.
Yeah.
Like it reminded me of like those 1950s cartoons. Like it just
For me, old
Yeah.
Italian cinema. Yeah.
It very much feels like a movie from the 1950s.
Yeah. It's definitely a time and place type of film. It's
Like if they had made like a cartoon version of Casablanca.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
For sure. And like, of course, the Italian overtones as well. That's pretty much very apparent with the Wind Rises.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just Caproni. Yeah, just the fact that Judo and Capone are sharing a dream world.
Yeah.
Their love of aviation, their love of planes has created, and you never really know if this is what's really happening,
No,
but you get the sense that they're communicating with each
Yeah.
other in the outside
Yeah.
world too.
and I can't help but mention it also reminds me a lot of Terry Gilliam films, at least that setup. Or
Very
that
much
feel.
so,
Kind of
yeah.
like you blend in with reality.
Brazil,
Fear and Loathing.
yeah,
Like ultimately you're in a real world, but then the dream world.
yeah, mystical realism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even like Garcia Marquez type of like how he jumps into narratives and stuff.
Yeah.
This is a case study because this is everything he loves, and it's ultimately the most ironic thing imaginable. It's about the man who made planes for Japan during the war.
Yeah. The documentary, The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, talks about how he struggled illustrating the plane.
Which is weird, which is fascinating. That was like one of the key takeaways for me.
Well, I don't know because I think it was his struggle with glorifying a plane that had caused so much
Yeah,
destruction.
and I remember the producer mentioning you technically made it an anti-war film,
Yeah.
and he has anti-war messages, but it's also the glorification of these awesome planes.
It was this dichotomy of I don't know what I don't know if I want to say a dichotomy, but it's these two sides of and they talk about this. The characters talk about this in the film. It's like and then Caproni says it at the end. You know, they're beautiful dreams of destruction.
That's what they're
Yeah,
made for.
that's what they've become. You know, that's they've been co-opted by man's propensity for war, and it's been turned into something horrible. And when at the end, when Jiro is walking through the dreamscape, it's now cluttered with the remains of all these planes that have been destroyed,
Yeah,
and it's like, wow.
yeah. And for a Ghibli film, this is like the ultimate setup. And yeah, it starts off as you would expect with the boy, and the boy Jiro is daydreaming and making planes. For
Yeah,
mind you, this is like during early 20th century Japan. He lived in a rural place. Those sequences ultimately remind me of one of
yeah, out in the boonies.
yeah, out of the boonies. Ultimately reminds me of one of Miyazaki's heroes. I have yet to do research on his relationship with Ozu. Ozu is one of the most influential directors, not only in Japan but filmmaking in general. Especially when they go into the house and set up like a Ozu film, and it's almost like a small little bubble into like not only Jiro's life but also Miyazaki's life. I can't help but think this is what Miyazaki saw as a kid, wanting to fly planes right as he got on top of the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a simple beginning, very simple beginning.
Well, his father, I guess, sold airplane parts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in in real life for Miyazaki, and then you see this beautiful boyhood dream coming to life in the beginning, but it's interrupted by a few blimps with a certain iron cross, kind of like a weird abrupt way, like foreshadowing. Like
Yeah.
there's awesome planes out there and dreamlike planes, but there's the real planes up ahead too.
He saw, I think, the darkness.
Yeah, even as a kid.
Yeah, and I think that plays into almost like the yin and yang. Like, okay, here's the light and there's the dark.
Yeah,
It's like you can't have one without the other.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that plays into the movie and the message of like, here we are, we just want to create, but it's hijacked for the purposes of war.
and also
Yeah.
in that beginning, it has a relatively ironic quote. Another foreshadowing aspect of the film. It has the beginning quote from the French poet Paul Valéry: "The wind is rising. We must try to live."
Yeah.
It's like a good contrast because you see the boy living, while seeing this abrupt, realistic. Like when I initially saw, I'm like, oh man, that's dark. That's really dark. This is a normal kid growing up in Japan. All of a sudden, he sees vegetables from Germany, the Iron Cross, or at least like the warfare aspect of during World War I. I'm like, holy cow,
Yeah.
yeah, that's dark. But it transitions a-okay towards school. He meets up with a teacher that wants to teach him English, or shows him a book on aviation because he sees
A magazine, yeah.
he sees potential, and it has a cover of one of our characters in the film, Caproni.
I love that Miyazaki made him a character
Yeah,
in the film.
yeah.
It's like, what?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's kind of like the obvious nature. This is Miyazaki's like love, 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 love. The books we were reading for our research for the podcast episode for our special, he has chapters upon pages upon random scribblings and interviews over the techniques of animation specifically for transportation. We're talking
Yeah.
about trains, boats, and airplanes.
It's on full display in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. The
It's-
train, whether it be trains, locomotives,
Oh, yeah.
whether it be the oxen pulling the plane
Yeah.
out to the field, whether it be people pushing the carts and stuff. It's on the little steamships that take them across. All of it feels they're able to between the sounds and the animation, it just brings it to life.
Yeah. And then, yeah, even having what you mentioned, like making Caproni an actual
Character in
character,
the movie.
and
Yeah.
he's based on a real life person too. And he was an early designer, not for the Italian warplanes, but more for aviation in general. He's a pioneer. Like I would consider him like the granddaddy or one of the granddaddies of steampunk. Because he tried everything crazy, and steampunk's infamous for having its own crazy inventions on full display.
It's insane that they're reaching across the void to speak to each other, but it's almost like this union of this, like, not secret, but this collective of engineers that are spread across the globe
Yeah.
that are talking to each other, where they're creating something, but at the same time they know exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I always go back to how artists have this kind of conversation where they create something and it becomes a kind of like a poem, you know.
It continues.
Well, it's a poem, and it's put out. It's a like a message in a bottle.
Ah.
It's something that you put out into the world, and then people find it and they read it, or they see it and then they respond to it.
Yeah.
And there's this constant conversation going on. It might not be an actual audio conversation like we're having now, but it's this conversation, and that the movie really, really does that well in making Juro and Caproni talk within the dream.
Yeah, the same like mines too, the dreamers,
Yeah.
the ones that want to do aviation just for aviation.
Yeah.
And Miyazaki ultimately took it in with Jiro because Jiro, even in his regular biographies after the war too, he became a professor for aviation and other things as well. Like he was almost like what Miyazaki could have been if he didn't do animation in a weird way.
Yeah.
I could definitely see Miyazaki as a professor kind of thing. And yeah, these dreams or visions are abrupt. They happen right from one frame to another. So it's kind of like a weird leap of faith. But the beginning as well is very key because it's not a typical biography.
No.
And it's Ghibli too. At the end of the day, it's still Ghibli, but because I had to do background on how popular this film is. Not necessarily popular with the Ghibli fans, but it's well regarded. And I think 10 years from now, 20 years from now, especially with more kids going to film class and stuff, they're going to think this is one of the best Ghibli films.
Well, it's a very niche film.
Very.
It's almost for an audience of one.
Yeah.
And I think that, like I said, it's his most personal film.
Yes.
For me, I don't know what he would say, but I think as his last film, well, he's very, when they do the screening for the staff at the theater, he goes up and he thanks the staff, and he tells them that he's very embarrassed because this is the only time he's ever cried at one of his movies.
Yeah, that was endearing.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because maybe it's his last and he knows what's coming, or because it's the person that they made essentially his passion project. This is his message. This is all the things that he loved wrapped into one place, and they were able to bring that to life for him.
Yeah, and how we mentioned earlier how revealing the curtain, where's the Wizard of Oz? This is him being out of that element. Like this is like my heart onto the screen. And,
like watching it, and I was, by the end of the movie, I was kind of in tears. I was like, I can't do that.
No. It's a film that sneaks in because like I said, the beginning, even though it has a weird contrast from dream world to reality.
Yeah.
Pre-World War II, this point A, point B type of progression. You see him grow. You see him going to school. You see him like studying more of his love for aviation and stuff without knowing the further use for him. And it becomes more of the passion project because you see it in his eyes. You see Jiro kind of like reacting towards these things little by little. And even with love, even the love story, it's ultimately very patient. But what I mean with how it's handled, it's not a typical Ghibli film.
No.
It's definitely a niche film, but it's at this point, during those sequences, you just have to see what it is and go along with it.
I agree. I agree. I mean, as a it's wonderful as a historical movie.
Yeah.
It's a Studio Ghibli movie through and through. The music, the dream sequences, the attention to detail. Oh my God, that German plane.
Yeah.
I
In the
would
beginning, yeah.
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 I would not have wanted to draw that
No, no, no.
ever.
Yeah.
The level of detail that goes into this movie is amazing. Animating the disaster earthquake. Oh my God! All the moving people, all the things moving in that movie. It's like the amount of animation that went into every like still of that.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's a good way to lead up to the progression of the film because pretty much like the first quarter of it is Jiro growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where like the dialogue is very keen, very subtle, goes back and forth. It's probably one of the best written Ghibli films, I would argue, too. And it gets to a point where Jiro's in Tokyo or nearby Tokyo for school. During this whole thing, he's on a train. This is the initially part, beginning of the second part. You know, he's reading a book. He's talking French philosophies and stuff. He knows a little bit of French because initially how he learned different languages for aviation. So you already see that keen sense of him growing up, like being a man. And during this lovely train ride, he sees a girl. She loses a hat into the wind, and he catches it.
The wind rises.
The wind rises, and he mentions that French, or no, it's from an English poet that did that poem,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken. And and that's where we get introduced to Naoko. Yeah, and Naoko is a tremendous character.
It's that moment. Well, the wind is a character unto itself.
Very subtly, and initially from the beginning, from the dream. Yeah.
Like the wind makes him. She's almost gonna lose her hat, but she doesn't.
No.
Jiro loses his hat,
Mm-hmm.
and she saves it.
No.
And it's the wind that kind of subtly, well, not so
Oh,
much subtly.
they push.
The
him
wind pushes them.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, hey, yeah,
Yeah, but you know, it's a nice little exchange. She's distracted by her mother, who's in the other car, kind of like waving. I love that little exchange too because the detail is tremendous in that scene. And this is Ghibli evolved. Like this is the final Miyazaki directed film, so the progression is very apparent with this film. And so the exchange is cute, subtle, nice little cherry on top. Like you get the cherry instead of the ice cream in that exchange. And there's a very abrupt sequence that happens, and that is
the earthquake.
specifically the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. It happened on September 1st, and this is initially the earthquake that changed Japan forever.
Yeah.
Similar Great San Francisco quake.
Yeah, it destroyed most of Tokyo.
Yeah, and it pretty much became a pioneer for Japan to become, a force in World War II. And yeah, this whole sequence of this destruction, like Edwin was mentioning earlier, is probably the best animation in the whole film.
Yeah,
Especially with the detail for each person going through the city, the subtleties of the fire winds and the aftershocks. Oh my God, it was the most visceral experience I could think of. And this is from a small little 5-minute sequence in a Ghibli film.
yeah,
Tremendous.
yeah.
Yeah, and you get to see the emotions. Naoko's fine, but her maid is hurt. So Jiro takes the realms as the hero. He carries her throughout the town, miles for all I know. They have to wait after the aftershocks. They finally reunite with Naoko's family. And the father thanks Jiro. But during this whole exchange, this whole time, Jiro doesn't even get Naoko's name.
No, no.
Because of the chaos of the destruction.
Yeah,
And the whole exchange in the beginning, or their first initial exchange, was barely a minute, it feels like. I'm like, oh my God, if they can only go back.
well, he has to go and save the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, the university, Tokyo University, is burning down.
Yeah, where he goes to school.
So he goes to help them.
Yeah.
And see if his friends are okay. And
Yeah.
when he goes back, her house is completely gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Luckily, the maid's okay. After that whole sequence with the earthquake, it sets it up. It's definitely more apparent, but it's not the focus of the film.
No. No, the romance is not the focus. The focus of the film is his true romance.
Which is aviation.
Aviation,
Yeah,
planes, yeah.
yeah.
And the company that he goes to work for, he proves himself from day one. He's able to do things that kind of amaze them.
Yeah.
and there are several projects that fail, but in the ultimate long run, he's able to deliver to them what they want, and they give him the room. They
Yeah,
give him
yeah.
the room. It reminded me a lot of Miyazaki.
Process
Yeah.
and Ghibli in general.
Yeah, with Suzuki kind of like being the producer in the background and saying, "Here, we're gonna let you do you because we know that it's gonna be amazing."
Yeah, yeah. But that's the transition because like I said, this earthquake could have been like the whole film. Like, okay, we have to see the ramifications. And it
Yeah.
does. It does a nice, sweet, short and sweet kind of way. Sad too, and it's effective. But it comes into a point where he has another daydream
Well,
with Caproni.
it's an event in the film that kind of like changes. Well, it introduces him to the love interest of the film,
Yeah.
but it also kind of like you said changes the course and direction of the country.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
and yes, and it leads literally to the next sequence with following daydream of Caproni.
Yeah.
Now this is a key one because it shows Caproni trying to make his water boat.
Yeah, and
It's a fun scene.
it's there. Those people are everywhere.
Yeah,
Those scenes are always fun because
yeah,
there's just like it reminds me of Porco Rosso,
to
where
the
the
T.
entire town was building the plane,
Yeah,
and you see everybody's in the plane, and the plane crashes,
yeah.
and you're just like, oh
Well,
man,
and that's the key thing. How Caproni responds, he's very frustrated,
yeah,
and it kind of throws me off because I thought he was like a nice, pleasant man who wants to help out Jiro by any ways necessary, any type of wisdom he can give him. But that specific one shows the humanity of Caproni because Caproni is a frustrated inventor. He wants to make these dreams into reality.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's ultimately one of the messages of the film
But
too.
also that it doesn't always work that way.
No,
Yeah,
but how Jiro sees it though, I believe that it doesn't make him waver. During the whole time, you see this weird confidence with Jiro, especially with his designs. He doesn't beat himself up when one project fails or one plane fails, which leads up to the following sequence where he finally gets to get to the engineering school, get adjusted there. Uh, and that's a wonderful transition
well,
to
he's very single-minded.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, and point A, point B. And during this going into the engineering school, I love it because it's like day one. Like, here you go, buddy. You gotta make these planes for the government. Do it now.
oh, that's his job.
Yes,
That's not the university. That's actually when he gets hired for the he gets hired for the company,
yes, yes.
and they're like, okay, now you have to work for a living.
Yep,
You
yep.
know,
Work,
and
work, 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 work.
and they feel like he's being hazed, but he delivers.
Yeah,
He delivers on everything that they give him to.
yeah.
Yeah, the things that fail kind of aren't his fault.
No, no.
It shows the struggle of Japan trying to become this more modern society, but how they fail and how the government's willing to do things that they don't agree with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, no. And that's the thing because, like I said, with the earthquake, things were emotional for Japan as well. Like, okay,
Yeah.
seeing that the World War II sequence in the beginning towards the earthquake, dominoes are falling. Japan becomes an industrial complex. It becomes like more manufactured country. Everything's for our army.
Yeah.
Yeah, and during this whole thing, you don't see the politics at play, but you do see the progression or their starting points towards like Japan starting from being poor and rural to being industrialized. And it's a tricky process.
Yeah, that happens over the course of the film.
Yeah,
Judo and his friend kind of push this along
yeah,
because they're frustrated by the lack of progress. Watching the planes be, the planes are wood and canvas,
yeah,
and it's like the Germans are 20 years ahead of them. The Germans are making all metal planes that can lift off and fly through the air,
yeah,
where Japan is nowhere near that. And it's the two of them that push Japan, that push those planes almost into the future.
yeah.
Yeah.
And what you mentioned earlier, one of the sequences of the oxen. This
Yeah.
is a key focus in that exchange too, because the oxen are pulling the planes
Yeah.
into the factories. Symbolically, it's pretty much Japan with their old ways going into their new ways.
Well, it's kind of like the idea of Japan going from being a rural society into a modern society at warp speed
Yeah, very
with
very fast,
yeah,
very fast.
without time to really
They,
like take a breath and say, okay, and I don't think any society really takes a breath
no, no,
and says what's happening. It just happens.
yeah.
And
Even
yeah,
America, yeah.
and I think that that's why you get this kind of sense of like this forward progress, but also this romanticizing of backward ideas because you haven't had the ability to psychologically process. It takes almost a generation to psychologically process these changes
Yeah,
and adapt to them. The older generation can't really adapt to how quickly everything is changing, and it's on full display in this film.
yeah, and yeah, in that team in that factory working for the government, Jiro's with his colleague, and that person's Hanju, and Hanju is also in the same kinship as Caproni, as a guiding force towards Jiro because he's a practical inventor too.
Yeah,
And I didn't mention the scene where they're in school together. They pretty much like an idea for a new wingspan by looking at the macro ball.
yeah,
So
that's all Juro.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Hanju kind of like forced him, like, oh, he kind of like plays him with that. It's like, oh, you get your ideas from macro bones,
yeah,
and that's the creative process. These gears are in motion.
yeah.
So you get that wonderful sequence towards the plant, the aviation plant. Ultimately, you kind of have to tie in towards Ghibli. You just have to. It's like apparent as set in stone because ultimately the viewpoint of Miyazaki during his heydays in the animation studios.
Well, I think it's the back and forth. It's the back and forth, but it's also like his obsession and single-mindedness.
Yes.
Like when his boss finds out that he's engaged, he starts laughing.
You're married to your job, buddy.
well, they laugh because they're like, you look at women, you know?
That too. That too.
Well, essentially, it's like you look at anything but planes.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
No.
And that's why I
You
alluded
know?
to earlier with Jiro, because Jiro, even though he has failures and discourses, keeps on going. He knows
Yeah.
he can get these things done. He's not a typical hero.
When I would say that he's a hero in his own life, and I would say that his journey is all about that plane.
Yeah.
That's his journey. That's it. That's his journey. That's his journey within the film, is making that dream plane a reality.
Yeah.
There's a scene when the plane is finally almost ready. He comments on it how it might be too heavy and how he can like he reduced the weight of it, and he said, well, maybe if we leave the guns off, and everybody starts laughing because they know what they're making.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
making warplanes.
It's a good irony play there.
Yeah, Juro's the only one that's like, wait, he's still just trying to
Mr.
make,
Aviation.
yeah, he's trying to make a plane. He's
Yeah.
trying to make a beautiful plane. And, nothing, it's like, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, society's not, that's not who your customer is.
Yeah.
And you have to give your customer what they want.
Yeah, the warp complex in every culture and country, especially after the 20th century.
Yeah.
And Japan was one of the key cornerstones for World War II, and it's wonderful.
They're one of the members of the Axis.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. And the politics come in play gradually, and then it comes to a point where Jiro has to take a trip to Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love how they jumped into Germany because it felt like a different world. It felt like German Impressionism.
Yeah.
Starting right as you get in cold, harsh backgrounds. Even the painting is apparent with that.
Yeah.
Or the backgrounds, they're painted on like it's on the surface. It's like it's right there. That's what it is. That's Germany.
Well, that scene where the secret police go chasing after a Jewish person.
Yes, yes.
It's like,
It's foreshadowing too.
yeah. Well, one of the things I love about this movie is these are people of their nations, but they're not committed to the war.
Oh yeah.
These people, these are not warmongers. These are not like people who are driven to create things for war. They're just driven to create.
Yeah.
And their society, the nations that they kind of the nations that they live in have hijacked these creations for war.
Yeah.
It's like there's no purity. It's like they like I said, human nature has hijacked this, has co-opted creation to be a force of
I
destruction.
know. Even
Yeah.
with America, like the early days of Korean War and World War II, we're talking about baseball players, we're talking about football players.
Yeah.
Jackie Robinson was in World War II. Uh,
Well, the thing that I love is that these people are citizens of their nation,
yes,
but they are not like they're not driven toward that aspect of war.
not at all. And
No.
that's what I mean, because you can even take like a baseball player, an athlete, somebody's supposed to excel in their field and concentrate in their field. No, you're with the war. And that's
Yeah.
Jiro's case ultimately. Like, you're genius. Even his boss, who's a very stickler, Kurokawa, he's a stickler. He's like demands. He softens up because he sees Jiro's potential. He just does it in his own way, kind of.
Yeah.
Thing. And Kurokawa is one of the best characters, and he's the small he's the small type of like typecast boss. And in the English dub, I have to give a special shout out to Martin Short. He does the voice.
Oh, wow.
It's my favorite Martin Short thing. It is.
Martin Short performance.
Yes, sadly, and I've always had respect for him. I never like was in love with him, even with like Three Amigos and stuff like that. No, this is a showcase. He's excellent in this.
I agree.
But yeah, going back to Germany, that's where Jiro and Honju are studying the planes and the German planes and stuff.
Yeah.
And this is, the Axis powers, their partnership, they're keen. Japan weirdly was always a force in military play. They handled Russia during World War One, but they're relatively a poor country. But with the Axis powers, it gives them a little bit of up. It gives them a little bit of leverage, at least politically, and advances in technology. So this little orientation trip in Germany, they have to study the planes. However, this is another key scene in the film. The German soldiers restrict them, like, no, you can't look at this. But they were paid and signed to do it from the German government. So the racism is subtle, very subtle, and that's what the whole like, it's like one of those scenes where it doesn't like hammer it, but in his director's choice of Miyazaki, he shows, there's prejudice. It's the only instance I could think of with prejudice. Well, okay, I'll take that back. At least with different sexes, especially Princess Mononoke, but the prejudice of different races interacting with each other.
Yeah.
So and this is kind of like the very fascinating thing about Ghibli. It doesn't tackle every issue imaginable, and you don't ask them to. They do it in their own subtle ways.
Well, I think that they do it in this movie because this movie is their movie set in reality.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a historical drama, and it's a period piece, and you get that conflict.
Yeah.
You get that kind of like I like that they show the forces that are at play in making these choices.
Yeah.
And in doing these horrific things, and how they're like, we don't want to do this, but this is what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't really have a choice.
It's a good, interesting scene. It's an interesting exchange. It definitely shows like the friendship and kinship with Jiro and Hanju, because Hanju is more of the realist. He has a lot of good quips about the politics at the time.
Well, he's not as his. This is I don't.
I know where you're going. Go for it, buddy.
His head isn't in the clouds.
Yes.
The way
I knew you were going there.
Judo's is.
And
And
Miyazaki's.
yeah. Well, you know what I'm saying. I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
But ultimately, like, because they get what they needed there, they look at the designs, and this, part of Miyazaki's love with aviation. He even loves German planes, and the designs, and these little things can make it go faster.
Oh yeah, there's little like latches and bolts and like
it definitely goes in the steampunk route when they go inside the plane. Like, this is like, it's almost like you can live in here kind of thing. Yeah, it's cool. It's actually really artistically a really cool scene or sequence.
Well, it shows what they're able to create, not only for like, they're being used for war, but they're these creations that are amazing and beautiful and like can be used for so much more.
Eventually.
Like Caproni has his ship, and he talks about how it's going to be used to carry passengers. He's like, it's going to be used to carry passengers from one place to another.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, he doesn't want it to be used for the war.
No, no.
Yeah.
And that's where it ties into the next one. Jiro has another dream. This time it's a deep dream, and it's him talking to Caprone again. Caprone's checking up on him, but Caprone is very advanced, and like you mentioned, pretty much made a passenger plane.
Yeah.
And this is a cool dream sequence because it shows pretty much Italy, life of the party. Like, let's have all fun on the plane and listen to music and all that jazz.
Yeah.
All these beautiful Italian women into the plane. But also, yeah,
I was like, man, I want to go to Italy.
yeah, that, for me too.
Really,
Like, it was like my Italian heritage coming out to life, because that's why I immediately think of Italy. At least like our passions too, and our advancements too.
Yeah, it's like, I want to go to Italy and dance to some music with, and drink some coffee with a beautiful Italian woman.
But subconsciously too, the growth process of Jiro kind of shows him that, yeah, this is the sweet life. You can have your fun with the planes, but you need a lady.
Well, I don't. Well, it shows there's another plane off in the distance.
Yeah.
That's carrying Caprone's family, and I think that's kind of like
Dad as well, subconsciously there, and also like externally too, kind of like, we haven't even brought this up too. Italy was also part of the Axis, and the relationship between Japan and Italy, of course, separated. They never really interacted with each other because Italy more focused on Africa, and Japan, of course, with the Pacific. Ultimately, like, they're two contemporaries in way different from their politics too.
Yeah,
and also with family stuff too. Italy's infamous for having big families, and Japan.
Big comment on that. Yeah,
yeah, and Japan is also like has a similar trajectory with Italy. So I like how that specific dream sequence kind of illustrates the very diverse nature of this film.
Yeah.
And
but also the similarities between cultures.
And the love and the appreciation. And and that's when it was like a wake-up call for Jiro, because the very next half of the film, it ultimately becomes what it should have been, but it wasn't. Because, like you mentioned, it's ultimately a love story of aviation and dreams and creativity. But I would argue without those things, you wouldn't have love.
Well, I think Jiro is going through the process of creating his dream plane, and it's trial and error.
Yeah, and it's his first failure because he try to design the Mitsubishi 1MF10.
Yeah.
And this is a long process. We're talking like a whole gap, and he finally flies it. And it's an epic scene.
Yeah. But then the guy tries to push it to the limits.
Yes.
And it's destroyed. And then that's when Jiro goes on his retreat.
Yeah.
And the wind helps him again.
The wind's the meditation. And like you said, is the guiding force.
Well, the wind guides him to his future fiance. If it weren't for the wind blowing that umbrella, they never would have reconnected.
Yeah. And this is the heart and soul of the film.
Yeah.
Because it is meditation. It's going back to force. And we're going back to Miyazaki. Because who is Miyazaki? He's a man of nature. He appreciates nature uttermost compared to a lot of his other passions too. Of course, aviation's like his physical love. I think nature is more of a spiritual love.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
And the wind, of course, being the guiding force.
I mean, the roof on the top of the Ghibli building is
a garden.
That's a garden, yeah.
And he can see Mount Fuji from there.
Yeah.
And it's tremendous. And it's in a nice little section of I forget which city specifically.
Well, when you walk up there, it feels like you're walking into, with the little benches and the cat and the ivy covering everything.
Yeah.
You feel like you're walking into a Ghibli film.
In a nature of like sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not too far from daycare. That's where the kids can see the goats. It's awesome. It's awesome. But yeah, in part of the sequence, of course, is that ethos of Ghibli, that we are one with nature. We are humans. We deserve to our own retreats. And this specific area is Karuizawa. Karuizawa is part of the Kitasaku district in Nagano. And yeah, if I had to pick a place to go on a resort or see a shrine or see a New Year's festival,
you're like, I'm going.
I'm there right now. Similar Super Cub and similar Laid Back Camp.
Yeah.
Like, I'd rather go there. Like Tokyo and Osaka, definitely in a day. I'm not like we live in the city. I see a city every day, and Tokyo has a million things Chicago doesn't have, but the country, the people, the roads, the history. I'd rather see that. At
Yeah.
least if I had to pick the scales.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, in this Kurosawa retreat, like Edwin alluded to, he's studying the wind. He wants to get back with nature. And how the wind works is where he tries to figure out the pieces. His life is not bad. He's progressing. He's making good money. His company trusts him. And these plans are helping the nation of Japan. But, he needs this retreat. His failures and his complexities of life, they're coming to a head. And it's so awesome seeing this sequence because you rarely get that glimpse in films, in art in general, because you don't see that tension sometimes, and you rarely get that midway break of a meditation because these are usually at the end or even the beginning.
Yeah.
Like you need that meditative beginning to process your brain.
Well, because the movie works in a very strange way.
Extremely.
The movie, this is Jiro's movie.
Yes.
And the pacing of it is very, for a film, it's a very oddly paced movie. The forward momentum is history.
Yeah.
History is kind of like,
yes.
History is unfolding and kind of dragging them along. And Jiro is on his single-minded path of creation with his dreams and his, like you said, meditations. And at this point, the movie kind of comes to a screeching halt.
It's literally like take a step back.
Yeah, narratively, it's like, but it's also the moment because Jiro is so single-minded and so focused on his journey that outside influences usually don't make an impact on him.
Yeah.
And this is where he reconnects with her, thanks to the wind. And this is where he can take that moment and say, oh.
Yeah. And it's a playful way. And
yeah,
like I was mentioning how this is like such a unique experience. This is also one of the most, like, if you were taking a film class, this is what you do with a cute little love story. So Jiro gets to this resort and he notices like this painting or this painting top on top of a hill. He kind of walks by it and without noticing, that's Naoko.
Jiro notices nothing.
Yeah.
He notices nothing.
He's oblivious.
He is oblivious. Every moment through this film, I'm like, is he gonna walk? He's gonna walk right past.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait.
He's that preoccupied.
Well, no, I know that at some point they reconnect in the film because I remember watching this way back when.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, the movie is halfway over. When is he gonna talk to this woman?
Yeah, see?
And it's the wind.
That's the one.
The wind. She's there on the top of the hill painting in the sun, and she's using the umbrella to kind of protect her from the sun. And the wind blows it all the way.
Yeah.
Right toward Jiro, and he catches it and he saves it and brings it back to her. He's his hero. He's her hero once again, thanks to the wind.
Yeah.
He has saved her again because of the wind.
Yeah. It's also kind of like one of those things where they don't really recognize each other.
Got it.
Yeah. And basically they have like a cute little exchange, like the building of the tension. Like the best romances, I would argue, like are the case studies of tension, even more so than an action film, because you're like, can they see? Look at her eye. She's right there. In the scene in the restaurant, they're being blocked by a waiter.
Yeah.
And then, sure enough, with that umbrella, Naoko is in the sacred place near a stream. It almost looks like a shrine. She's in the middle of a shrine, and Jiro kind of had to have that rediscovery. Like, oh, I remember this woman. Yeah, I remember this woman because the earlier sequence in the film, the maid thanks him. And he doesn't even get her name there too.
Oh.
And they have this like, oh, I remember you. You helped me out of the earthquake. Oh, I always wanted to say thank you.
That's almost to me their wedding moment. Like they're
immediately in love.
Yeah, they do get married later on.
Yeah.
In the film, but to me that was their ceremony.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, and the spring, like you said, like that connection to nature, that almost spiritual like reconnection that they're having.
Yeah.
Where and to me, that was the moment that they got married.
Yeah.
That was the moment that they became soulmates, and the rest of the film is just, you know, history getting in the way,
Yeah.
life, reality getting in the way of that moment.
And the best romances do that.
Yeah,
Very long engagement, one of my all time favorites. Yeah, that's the case study.
yeah,
Uh, of course, about World War I, and but yeah, in that moment, it becomes like a nice little playful thing. Jiro uses the umbrella because it's raining. They have a cute little exchange with a paper airplane, and that's where he's studying the wind.
yeah,
This is a woman that loves you, and you love her, and she's helping you out.
yeah.
And they even reconnect with the father. Uh, and in between this sequence too, you get this weird exchange with this weird German guy named Castro. It's thrown in there. It's definitely more for political play. Like things are going in motion.
Well, I think that there's that scene that you said at the restaurant
Yeah.
where he sits between them. I think that that's kind of like a representation of what's happening in the film.
Yes.
How the conflicts, the earthly conflicts, are coming in between them.
Yeah. Physically
Yeah,
and mentally and spiritually too.
yeah,
Yeah. It,
figuratively and literally. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah. And because of that, Jiro like is knowing he's in love. It's just one of those things where he has to get the formalities out of the way.
yeah,
So he talks through Nyayoko's father, and the father's a very cool character. And he's like, all right, I got your blessing." And it's such a cute scene because part of me is feeling like Miyazaki has to like, okay, we gotta get going, but Naoko immediately comes down the
she's
stairs.
like, "Hey,
Yeah,
Dad."
like an angel coming from heaven, and
Yeah,
she's on the stairway. She's looking so tenderly in front of Jiro. Jiro the same way. This is his Romeo moment, but Naoko had to give him bad news. She has
yeah,
tuberculosis,
yeah.
and part
And
of the
that his, not only that, but that her mother died of it a few years before.
for a
Yeah,
little bit of warning, and this is like pre World War II. That was apparent, and people died from it.
yeah,
And Japan had a backwards way of treatment, unfortunately. At least at a time frame.
yeah. It was that was. I knew that that was part of. I knew that the film ended sadly. I couldn't. Well, I'd seen this when it was released
Yeah,
way back when.
yeah,
Watching it again for the podcast, I was like, I'm gonna cry.
yeah.
Yeah,
No, this is how
it
heart
got
swings. Yeah,
the movie got me. I mean, it got me their relationship because there's not. This movie's beautiful and it tells a beautiful story, but emotionally, there's the focus of this movie is so tight on Judo, on his viewpoint. It's like the camera doesn't really go anywhere else.
exactly.
And so it's so focused on him and it's so focused on his relationship with her that there's not much room to go anywhere else.
Yeah,
There's
and
no
it's trying to block the noise.
well, there's no way to nothing relieves the pressure
Yeah.
of this like forward momentum in the film,
Yes.
and it weighs on you. It's like this is hard.
Yeah.
This is it's a hard movie to watch because while they try to keep a lot of the outside away, it still presses down on them, and it's you know what's going to happen because you know the movie they've already told you. She's already told you what's going to happen
Yeah.
to her, and you already know what's going to happen to him and the country because you know history, and it's just like barreling down, but it's barreling down is at its own slow pace,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time there's that pressure, that mounting pressure of history, and you're just like it got to be it got to me.
Yeah. And,
It
and
got to me.
that's why ultimately I'm so it's like one of those films I had to watch. Like
Yeah.
whereas I had that inclination.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's tricky.
it's
It
tricky.
tricks
It
you.
tricks you.
It makes you think like this is and it is. It's a quiet movie, like you said. It's a meditation on the creation of this airplane, on whether it was wrong or right to do it, or whether what it was. But at the same time, it's very intense.
Yeah.
It's
It
very
gets to that
intense.
point,
Yeah.
and it becomes a chase at that point. After a nice, quiet, romantic, very
Yeah.
endearing kind of like sequence, and midway, it's almost like the climax is like knocking on the door.
Yeah.
So it becomes the progression with the plane, of course.
Yeah, it takes its time
Yeah,
until that point, and then after that, it's just like we're making this plane.
yeah, yeah,
This is happening.
yeah. And
Yeah.
with that sequence, we get to the next part after the proposal. It becomes a weird, another, well, not like it becomes a transition towards the reality. Like I said, the secret police is in Japan,
Yeah.
and because Jiro talked to Castro, it becomes like, oh, he's part on the influence. So this is where its separation begins as well. Jiro has to hide into Kurokawa, his boss's house, for a while just to finish these plans.
Yeah.
Like, even though he's doing advances of the country, now outside influence is like, no, no, you can't do that because he had talked with Castrop, who, like I mentioned earlier, Castrop had like this weird influence, knowing what things are going on, almost like a spy.
Well, he knew the direction that Germany was going in,
Yeah,
and he he felt that in Juro he had found a kindred spirit
yeah,
because neither of them wanted their nations to go in the direction that they were going
yeah.
because they knew it wouldn't end well, and it didn't.
No, no. And
Not
it
for either of their countries.
ends Miyazaki pointed the nose a little bit, and he
Yeah.
lived through it.
Yeah.
And of course, one of the best things about the takeaway from the process of making this film for Wind Rises, how super personal it is for Miyazaki. We're talking about like trauma, and the part of the traumatic side of, and like it's a meme at this point how Miyazaki's depressed, but his movies are lovely. No, it's completely opposite. It's a man being real. You have happy days and you have sad days, and his process of things is what he is, especially in his works. So even though he conquers the day by his own trepidations, he finds a way to make sense of it all. And but yeah, it's tying in towards this film, The Wind Rises. One of his early like things that happened to him. He's lived during World War II. His family was part of the air raids, and he gets this letter from a random person that was actually helped by his father, Miyazaki's father. And in that letter, he mentions like he helped me, he basically saved my life because he gave him food because his house was destroyed and stuff. He was waiting at a doorstep in front of Miyazaki's house. Miyazaki was a baby around that time, so World War II was not even an afterthought. But he remembers key things like their initial air raids where his mom had to protect him, and there was inclinations where his family could have helped out other families too, and who knows what happened to them.
So their town was being bombed,
Yeah,
and a lot of it had gotten set on fire.
yeah,
And so they abandoned the house and they went to essentially hide under the bridge.
yeah,
And Miyazaki's father went back to the house. And when he went back to the house, he discovered that there was another family there,
yeah,
like hiding out because their house had burned.
yeah,
And so he went in, got the stuff he needed, and he didn't chase them away. He gave them some chocolates and said, okay, stay as long as you need to. And then he went to go find his family. And Miyazaki reflected on the fact of what would that man's life. Well, the man was a child. He was about Miyazaki's age. He was a little bit older than Miyazaki.
yeah,
And he said, what would that man's life had been like if his father had, chased them away
yeah.
instead of welcoming them? What if he had chased them away?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
this is during the production of Wind Rises, like it was meant to be. This is like the
yeah.
guiding force towards Miyazaki. Ultimately, he's
Well, it reminded him. It gave him. He had a lot of conflict with his father
yeah,
because his father sold, the parts for, warplanes, and it made him think. It gave him that view of his father as a kind and generous man, even though here he was making his profit
yeah.
off of
Ultimately, the ethos of Jiro. That is,
yeah
it's one of those like rare like instances. Like you see why he's doing this. This is his message. There's kind people in dreamers in time of madness and war.
yeah.
Oh,
Jiro was just a man who loved a woman and wanted to create. He wanted to create something,
yeah,
and it was transformed into a weapon of war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the chase. That's ultimately the guiding force, and that's where it goes to.
Yeah.
But during the way, we're going to back with the romance a little bit because they're in hideout. But Dan B, they're going to find a way to get married.
Yeah. She wants to be with him. I think she realizes that it's the only way for him to actually finish his creation.
Yeah.
And because once he finishes, once he's able to do it, she leaves.
Yeah.
She leaves, and I think that having her, and he says it too, having her by his side was what enabled him to complete his dream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the scenes are apparent because her for Toberg, how I mentioned how Japanese kind of had like a backwards way of treating it. I'm not sure if it's the only way. Correct me if I'm wrong, listener, but basically they had to bring them up to a mountainside for treatment. I'm not sure if it's like a sanctuary type of thing or it's a closer way or the
It's
closest.
called a sanatorium.
Yeah, it's probably the closest treatment. The more I think about it, but these are really sick people.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it was like an epidemic, or case studies, but ultimately she had to be treated there. But she didn't care. She's like, I just want to get back to my love.
She wanted to be with him.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
she goes back to her house, and Jiro gets an initial message that she's not doing too well. So there's another chase, and
He goes to her. Yeah.
and they embrace, and they're a train.
Well, that's when she's at her house.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah, the house.
and that's when she decides to go to the sanatorium.
Yeah.
So that she can get better.
Yeah.
But it's when he tells her what's going on with the plane that she decides to go be with him.
Yeah.
And when she's with him, he's able to complete the process.
Bedridden, she finds
Yeah.
a way to be with him next to him, literally as he's working.
Yeah, they're together. They get married. She was beautiful.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful scene. And he realizes that she's gone. When the plane is taking off and everybody's cheering and everybody's trying to pull him, he turns his head because there's a wind gust, and he knows.
Yeah.
He knows. And then that's when you get the dream sequence
At the end.
And he's able to say goodbye. I think that was the moment. And Miyazaki talks about this, that the dream sequence, you don't really get, Jiro doesn't seem to age
No.
throughout the film, but I think
It's Ghibli style ultimately is the conflicting nature.
Yeah, Caproni is there, and originally she had said, come on, it's time to go.
Yeah.
And that would have been like toward the end of his life. But he changes it to live. To live.
Yeah.
She tells him to live, and Caproni's like, "Come on."
Yeah.
And so it becomes less of like he's died too, and he's joining her in this heaven.
Yeah. Or purgatory.
To where in this dream world, she's able to say goodbye to him, and her message to him is to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
to continue on living.
Yeah, it's a very blunt one because it also shows the destruction of planes in front of this beautiful green open field, and Caproni and Jiro on top looking at the destruction. It's like, what else can we do?
Well, Caproni says it's a beautiful dream of destruction.
It is.
Yeah.
And then you see Naoko coming from you get the initiation that she has died and moved on to the afterlife. It's kind of like not only a dream sequence, but also kind of like a purgatory state. And then it's almost like a weird letting go moment. And
it's like, does he take his own life?
You don't know.
How does he? Well, he doesn't, because she tells him to live.
Yes.
But it's like, he's completed his plane, but he's lost the love of his life. And it's like, how does he continue on? And she tells him, live.
Mm-hmm.
You have to live. So I'm not sure if it's like because of the way time works in the movie.
Like one scene, real dream world.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is him at the end of his life, or this is him in that moment.
After the war.
Yeah, after the completion of the plane, and she's telling him, live. So I'm not sure. It's not really clear to me. I might have to rewatch it, but
for me, it was just like after all of that, after any sequence whatsoever. He could have had like vision a million times for all I know, maybe every day because of the trauma of losing his wife.
True.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, it's also based on two works of fiction. Or Wind Rises, I think, is biography, and then Nautical is more like an Anne of Green Gables kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to read it in the English translation when I can, both of those stories. So it's a hybrid. It's a hybrid of a lot of great works, and Miyazaki definitely being influenced for it,
Yeah.
showing his love, as it were.
What that scene where they're walking up the hill
Yeah,
that has all those destroyed planes,
yeah,
like half buried, that just reminded me of Nausicaa.
that as well.
Yeah.
And Nausicaa has like similar like visionary beats too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and,
Yeah.
and even the flying too. And of course, at the end where they show the final product, like that's how he flies. That's a nice
Yeah, that reminded me
Nausicaa.
of, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah. The similarities
and
are
Nausicaa
there.
being that good, that way back in early days of Ghibli, like the day of Ghibli. Oh my god,
Yeah.
oh my god,
Yeah,
because
like,
it looks more natural than Wind Rises, to be honest.
well, that level of competency and that level of, it was something, that level of quality was something that they never let go of
Yeah, yeah,
throughout their, like throughout their entire history, throughout the entire history of the studio, through the 11 films that Miyazaki directed. That level of quality it never left.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and we can't recommend this film enough. It's. I had to do a Miami list. I was curious. It was ranked over 8. It's surprisingly ranked over Nausicaa.
Yeah. I don't personally agree with that
I
in
I
my
I,
ranking.
I agree. The Nausicaa's
Yeah.
better. I
Yeah.
like Wind Rises better though. This is not how I am.
Well, I think that When Rises is a different kind of film,
It's
and when you sit down and watch it, you can't be like,
well, it's also an algorithm of many other classic films. We even Casablanca. The ending is pretty much Casablanca. Let's have some wine. Like
yeah,
I think there's a start. Beautiful friendship.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a yeah.
And also the other one I can't help but think of class or even Akira Kurosawa. Like it takes a lot of elements from Stray Dogs. Like yeah, it's like taking a film class.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it definitely is.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but I just, for me personally, Nausicaa will always have the connections
It's your
that.
first love. It's your
Mhm.
first love. That's me ultimately with Mononoke.
Yeah.
I've only seen the movie twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It will never be. I've watched the other Miyazaki films, and they've never, to me, because I think I watched Nausicaa as a child.
Yeah.
That was the one movie that I fell in love with, and I think that's what happens with everybody else.
Oh,
It's that movie. It's that one movie that they watch at that specific time period. Like for a lot of people, it would be My Neighbor Totoro,
yeah, of course.
but then for some people, it will be Ponyo,
Castle in the Sky, I consider the best one, but
Kiki's Delivery
yeah,
Service.
but
Yeah,
that one's a kind of like a weird like until you see it moment, like oh, I get it, I
yeah,
get it, I get it.
yeah. So there'll always be something. There'll always be a movie, and I think that for Studio Ghibli fans, they're at two different ends. They're kind of like bookends
Yeah,
to the entire process, and I think that that's why they are so different from everything that came in between.
very much so.
Yeah,
And these are wonderful films in general. Once again, can't recommend them enough, especially a Ghibli fan. They're not as regarded as Totoro, as Kiki, as Spirited Away. Understandably so. But there are definitely advancements in the whole process of things. And
I agree.
yeah, and more, like I said, 10 years, 20 years from now, those people that grew up in Totoro, those people that grew up in Kiki and Spirited Away, like even Howl's Moving Castle has a strong revival. A lot of people love that film.
Well, I think the people who are introduced to Studio Ghibli through those movies, I think eventually they might find their way to these two movies. But I definitely think that you have to be a little bit older to appreciate these
And
movies
see
for
some more
what they
films,
are.
and see some more films too. I would
Yeah.
argue. I would argue. Nazca especially, and Wind
Well, I
Rises.
would hope that they would watch these movies and then want to watch more films.
Yeah, that too. That too.
Where Nausicaa is pretty much cemented for me as my favorite Miyazaki film. I don't feel it never makes me. The thing about Nausicaa is there aren't very many other films like it. So I don't think it will like inspire you to go out and search for
Because it's its own film. It's
it.
its own thing.
It is its own thing,
Yeah.
and it makes you. It drives that imagination within you, where for me, The Wind Rises inspires more of a kind of a desire to know more about the world.
Yeah.
You know, more about the world and more about film.
In history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a different. It comes from and takes you to different places. Where Nausicaa will take you, I think, in to your imagination to express. I think that The Wind Rises takes you outward and into film and the world and like history.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And this has been our longest episodes for good reason, for a strong reason. And
Well,
mind
yeah.
you, these are movies, and that's the crazy thing, crazy thing, because we've done like 30 episode. We've done Resident Shield Hero. That's technically the longest tenured series we've done so far. Oh my god! Like these two, like not obscure, but definitely like not as regarded as its contemporaries.
Not as popular.
Not as popular, but guess what? They're still mind blowing to this day. And we probably talk another few hours about them, like
Yeah.
they're that special and that enduring. And this is my first time watching Wind Rises, so who knows if he does another one? I've seen all of them, or at least from Miyazaki, and it's a good way to close the chapter a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to end our first year of the 950 Club.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary to us.
Thank you so much to our friends and people that check out this show. We love it. It keeps me going. Gives that light match.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. It you know, like, subscribe, share. You know, we just want to make a show. You know, do a podcast where you guys can listen to us discuss this, be part of the conversation, but to just inspire you to watch more anime, more film, or whatever it is that you like and whatever it is that inspires you and fuels your imagination.
Yeah, and Ghibli does that, and it's good.
Ghibli does that on another level.
Beyond what we can do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But we thank you. We thank you. Please like and subscribe, download and share. And at this point we're getting our new thing going with new logo.
Yep.
Hey, after 1 year.
Yeah, we'll be doing season 2 of the 950 Club.
Woo!
Woohoo! Thank you guys. We love you.
And speaking of thanks, I'd like to give a special thank you towards Edwin, my podcast partner. He basically made a wonderful rendition of Nausicaa, of our review of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. And yeah, it literally looks like he came straight from the manga. It's tremendous. I love it too much because, like I said, and like I keep on preaching, Edwin was there since day one. So it's great to have a person like that on board. And also because of this past year, hey, again, thank you to all the listeners. Thank you to Jamal, who keeps on pressing us on, and Martin as well for always keeping in the know with us. I also want to give a quick shout out towards the help with these productions. First is from our previous episode with the music, Harumachi Music. I gave a little video link towards their music to give royalty-free music. So that instance, looking up the word itself, wind, it was tremendous. I love it too much. And a special, extreme special thank you towards the art of this particular episode, The Wind Rises. And that person is Rinsachi Arts from Instagram. I found her work through Instagram, of course, and it was, if you follow our page, we do Komi Fridays, and she had a wonderful Komi that I saw around the bend, and it looked like literally a Ghibli painting. And I always had that back in my mind, like, okay, maybe I'll talk to her one day. Like a lot of these artists, of course, are either starting off with or don't even want to bother her commissions. And lo and behold, she was available for the call because I wanted to do something special for The Wind Rises. And we went back and forth. She's a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous artist. Please, for the love of everything holy, follow this artist because she's barely at 3,000. She's an artist that can be up to Kujanov's level, to be quite honest. And I've seen other artists follow her and stuff. A lot of artists I love. So please, for the love of everything holy, Rin Sachi Arts. We will have the tag in our cover. And she gave us permission for that. And yeah, I thank her a million times over. She's from the Philippines, in a nice rural area. And oh my God, like when that instance of her describing her background a little bit, the magic is out there, people. And ultimately, with this podcast, I can't help but think about magic. And of course, the discussion with Wind Rises. It becomes not only a personal story of Miyazaki, but a personal story of your life. It's definitely one of the few Ghibli experiences you have where you really think about life. And oh my God, even for historical context and everything, it made me rethink a lot of things in life. And it came at the right time. And that energy always overflows you when you have that perfect medium looking back at you, essentially. And, it gave me a little bit more of a purpose. This podcast has ultimately been like the little seed. It keeps on growing, growing. So that patience pays off. So if you've been a listener since day one, if you've been a newer listener, or just been a casual listener, we greatly appreciate you checking out this episode, checking out the Ghibli special. And without this podcast, I won't even share my music. So without further ado, I will give you a nice little send off with The Wind Rises. Thank you again, and goodbye.